Good morning. My name is Yaron Golan. I'm a group program manager at Microsoft in the Dev Live platform group. And today I'm going to talk to you about opening up Windows Live data. So if you've seen our map of all of our lovely services, where you're about to be taken is to the part that says Windows Live User in particular, and specifically to contacts for now, but then also photos. So in the session description that some of you might have actually seen, since apparently it kept not appearing, I talked about how data wants to be free. And I can understand that as perhaps sounding like something out of, say, I don't know, the Communist Manifesto or maybe some anarchist creed. But in reality, what we mean when we say that data wants to be free is that it's an observation. And what we're observing is that the utility of a piece of data is a function of its accessibility. The more people can get to it, the more utility the data has. And this creates a very powerful force that drives data to go out of the containers we put it in and leak into all sorts of interesting places. And where we see that every single day in Windows Live is with our central address book database called Live Contacts. This is where all of your Hotmail contacts, all of your Messenger buddies, all of your Spaces friends, all of that information is put into this single database called Live Contacts. Last count, we had 500 million active address books in Live Contacts. And this is data that our users care very deeply about and want to make more useful to themselves by getting it out and making it available in places other than just Windows Live. And until a few months ago, the only way they could share that data was if they went and gave out their name and their password, their credentials, to some outside site so that site could come in and get access to the information and use it in a way that added value to the user. But as users, handing out our name and password, giving some foreign site the ability to become you, is that really how we want to do sharing? And as site owners, do we really want to be in a situation where we're being asked to handle user credentials for some other property, for some other site? Do we want to be in that business? So I think from both ends of this equation, this isn't what we want to be doing. As users, we don't want to give out our name and password, and as sites, we don't want to be in the business of taking other sites' name and passwords. So where this leads us to is, can we do better? And the answer is that, in fact, we can. And a few months ago, we really saw the first step to doing better. This site is my little demo site. It is up on the net. You can navigate there now if you'd like and play around with it. And one of the first things that we've done to do better is we've introduced the contact control. And this is a technology that hopefully, if those of you who were here yesterday at the 30-minute social app presentation, you saw a nice presentation on. And so I'm not going to go into too many of the details since they've described most of that there. The key thing I want you to understand here is that in our little fake site you see up on your screen, we from randomthirdparty.com are selling stuff. And in order to sell you the stuff, you need to be able to ship it to you, and we need an address. And in this case, the user wants to ship this information to their grandmother, whose address they don't happen to remember. And this is exactly the kind of scenario where the site would then come and say, well, if you give me your name and password, I'll go and show you your live contacts, and you'll be able to see grandma's address. But with the live contact system, we can do much better than that. By logging in to the contact control that is embedded on a third-party site, we can actually interact with our address book somewhere other than Windows Live properties. So if you're looking at the screen, what you're really seeing up there is randomthirdparty.com, which is some random third-party site. And what it has embedded in it is an iframe. And in that iframe is information that's coming directly from Microsoft. And thanks to the security model of the browser, the two pages can't actually see each other. So even though all of my contact information is sitting here, it's not visible to the hosted page. But the point of the experience is I want to share my data, so let's go and mark my grandmother's contact entry and say I want to share that. And what you're seeing here is we're telling you, look, we're going to share the data with this site, www.randomthirdparty.com. We're giving you access to their privacy statement, and that is something you need to take very, very seriously. Once you've moved your data out of Windows Live into some third-party site, it's out there. And you better understand that site's privacy policy. You better understand their data retention policies. You better understand what they're going to do with the data, because once you give it to them, there's no way to pull it back. And what we're showing you in the case of the contact controls, we're actually showing you which fields we're giving out, and we also show you exactly byte for byte the data that's going to be shared. So I trust those random third-party people to ship stuff to my grandmother, so I'm going to give them the information. And what you just saw there was the iframe from Microsoft has just transferred data to the host frame, which is in a different domain. And in fact, the way we did this does not involve a server round trip. Everything happened inside of the browser. So this is a very nice way to transfer information, and it works really well, but it does have some limitations. I click that. And those limitations are best demonstrated by the new version of randomthirdparty.com. As you can tell, I'm clearly award-winning HTML author. And what you're seeing in the new version of randomthirdparty.com is because we want to get some new VC money, and let's face it, the hot trend of the day is social networking, so we've decided to reinvent ourselves as a social networking site because, well, selling stuff was getting old. And we have some cool features, features you couldn't get from the contact control. One of the features we have is the ability to do on-demand address book synchronization. So if you have friends through Random Third Party who you've established a social network with through our site, and one of your friends should update their address book, well, in that case, we will instantaneously update your Windows Live address book with your friend's new email or shipping address or whatever changes that they decided to make. In addition to that, when you come and visit us, because you don't have to get synchronization. Synchronization will happen whether you're on the site or not. You don't have to remember to come back. But when you do come back, we're going to be able to show you what additions you've made to your address book while you were away from the site and ask you, hey, are these people who you'd like to make part of your randomthirdparty.com social network? Now, these aren't features I could get to you through the contact control. It's not quite designed for that. It's really more intended for situations where you don't necessarily have a deep trust relationship with the user. Right, these are for situations where maybe the user's not going to be very comfortable giving you all of your address book information. These are for situations where you need limited data on sort of a one-off. But in this case, for our new social networking site, one-offs aren't going to work. It's not going to be a great experience. This site needs deeper, richer access. And that's what I'm here today to talk about, how it is we're going to make that possible. So the first step to do this is we see the site is giving you some direction and saying, hey, I need access to your contacts. Here's my privacy policy. Please give me this permission. And by the way, I'm about to send you over to live.com. So let's click. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not the most welcoming page I've ever seen in my life. This isn't a page that I think most users are going to look at and say, I want to interact with this. And that's intentional. And the reason for that is actually, if you look up into the far corner, you see where it says Windows Live Alpha. It's not just the first letter of the Greek alphabet. It also indicates that this is an alpha release. This is not software that is intended to be used in production. This is software that is intended to be used for testing. And we always have a bit of a tension here. We get a lot of feedback from the community saying we want to have more of a say about how Windows Live is working, how we interact with it, make sure that it works with us in a way that, well, works for us. But at the same time, people want things released quickly. So in this case, what we've decided to do as sort of an experiment is to release this now, early, as an alpha. It's real. It's on real data, and I'll show you in a second how it works, so that you can come in and give us feedback. So we're asking you, please come and play with it. Go to www.randomthirdparty.com. Go to DevLive. I'll have the links later. Please go and use it and give us feedback, because we're now in a position where we can do something with your feedback. If we're releasing this as a beta, at that point, we're so locked in, because to be a beta, we need to have scale and privacy and a bunch of other things, that our ability to take your feedback is really restricted. So there has to be the trade-off. And the trade-off we're making is come early, put it out there, and get that feedback. So you may notice below the ugly red is a little note that says if you're testing out Windows Live Data, which is the developer name for this. This does not have a user-facing name. It's a dialog, not a product. Please scroll down. So let's do that. Ooh, look, it's a screen. And what you're seeing here is an approve access screen. And it's explaining to you that we are, actually it still says CTP, we'll make it say alpha. But it's telling you that this is a test. It's telling you which domain is going to get the information that we are being asked to share. It tells you what you're being specifically asked to share, in this case, to give essentially read-write access to your address book. It tells you what the privacy policy is for that site, so you can click on that. It also lets you know that when we give this permission, we're going to give the site your Windows Live member name, aka your email address. And no, that's not great. And yes, I will talk more about that in a second, or later on, I should say. It's also telling you that once you grant a permission, that permission is persistent and available 24/7 to the site you granted the permission to until you revoke it. And yes, I will show you the revocation page later. Now, in this case, I actually happen to trust those lovely social networking people at randomthirdparty.com, so I'm going to agree to give them access. Now, I will go through that gunk a little bit later, but the key message to take away at this point is the site, randomthirdparty.com, now has a permission that lets them get access to my complete address book. There we go. So just to reiterate, what you just saw is the alpha release of Windows Live Data. Again, that is a developer-facing name. This is not anything I ever intend to explain to a normal user. You don't give names to dialogues. And the purpose of this system is to be a generic permissioning system that we can use to allow you to ask users for permissions for eventually any of their services. What we're announcing right now is the alpha release with full support for live contacts. And in 60 days from now, we're going to go out with support for Spaces Photos. And the permissions you can ask for now are read or read-write, and it'll be for both of those. We're going to go beta, we hope, sometime later this year is the planning, and V1 would be next year. And keep in mind, when we go beta, that means it's a production system that has a scale and stability and security and everything else that we need to be hit by the whole world. It means the ugly warnings go away, which brings up a question. What's the difference between beta and V1 as far as an outside developer? Oops, wrong choice. Helps if I press that button. And the answer is, when we go V1, we're willing to sign on the bottom line. What we mean by that is the following. If we're going to go out to third-party developers and say, hey, come and develop on our services, come make our services an integral part of your system, you need to know what the deal is. You need to know ahead of time what are going to be the terms, and you need to have some kind of guarantee that those terms are not going to shift under you. And so for those of you who attended the meeting this morning with Brian Arbogast, you saw the announcement that we are actually going to be willing to sign the terms. And I'll just do a quick summary and then I'll move on because this isn't this presentation. The deal with this is that as long as your site is under 1 million unique users per month, there's no charge. And what we mean by that is we're not counting services. So if you have 5,000 users, all of whom are using both live contacts and Spaces Photos through your website, we don't care. We're not counting what services you're using. What we're counting is how many unique users do you make requests on behalf of to us, who you got permission from, in order to interact with your site. And keep in mind that no, we're not sitting there waiting for you to hit that 1 million so we can go have a chat with you. In fact, the calculation is based on a running 3-month average. So if you have normally, let's say, 250,000 of your users who are using Windows Live services, and then you get digged or slash-dotted or whatever, and you hit up to 1 million some month, and then the next month you're back to normal and it's 250,000, well, if I'm doing my math correctly, that's 1.5 million over 3 months divided by 3, 500,000. That's less than 1 million. It's still free. So we're not looking just to see a spike. We're looking for consistent usage. If you get to 1 million or over, then it's 25 cents per user per year. However, even that is actually calculated on a quarterly basis. So if you've got a great quarter, we're going to come and give you a prorated amount for the users during that quarter. And if the next quarter maybe wasn't so great, again, you're only going to pay a prorated amount for the users in that quarter. The contracts themselves will be running, I believe the final terms are being decided, but between 2 to 3 years. And for those of you who are saying to yourselves, well, hey, you know, my site's new, I haven't hit 1 million yet, can I get a contract? The answer is currently is yes. That can be very useful when you're trying to go for funding or just doing business planning. We will be willing to sign deals with sites that have under 1 million. So now, let's actually, now that we've gotten the business stuff out of the way, and we like business stuff, let's go build a website. I want to go show you how this thing actually works to see just how easy it is. And the first thing I'm going to tell you, and why it is you're looking at my host file, is that there's no registration with this system. There's no sign up. There's no accounts to create. You just come in and use it. We use DNS to do full validation. And so what that means is I can actually go right here in front of you and create a new website that's going to point to a machine, it's going to point to my local IIS server. So let's make up a website. How about MIX? Since we're at MIX. So I've added that to my host file, and I've learned from hard experience, always test your configuration before going live with it. So let's make sure I didn't boo-boo. Yeah, okay, that's working good, fine. So now I've created this new site called MIX, and I want to go give it a permission. So I'm going to show you how you do that, because it's just as simple as typing a fairly long URL. So what I'm typing now is the name of the Windows Live Data permission server that you're going to send a permission request to. And it's nothing more than a URL encoded request. And it has generally 3 arguments. The first argument is what's called the return location. And this is the page that you want us to send the user back to when we're done asking them if they want to give you permission or not. Remember, we don't know who you are. There was no provisioning. So the only way we know where to send the user when we're done with the permission, or even who to ask for permission for, is this value. And in fact, what we're going to do is we're going to take out the domain name, in this case www.mix.com. We're going to show that to the user and say, hey, do you trust these people? Because that's who is going to get the information that we're going to hand back that'll let them get to your data. Now you have to also give us your privacy policy. Oops, if I get that right. That's, if you saw in the link in the first demonstration, I had a privacy policy link there where this is where that value came from. There are no miracles. And then you have to say what particular permission you want. Actually, read right. Right now we have 2. Oops, helps if I spell that correctly. Live contacts. We have 2. You can ask for read permission or read-write permission. As a website, it's up to you to decide what to ask for. And as a user, it's up to you to decide what you're actually going to grant. When we go to spaces, we'll get to 4 permissions, and over time, we'll get even more. Normally, this would be it. This would be all you'd have. But we're testing. Because the thing you're going to notice about our system is that it requires you to have an SSL cert in order to get the response from the permission page. So for example, the website I had up and running, www.randomthirdparty.com, I actually got from an ISP. I paid them $20 to get an SSL cert. But because I'm running on my local machine and I don't have an SSL cert, I want to run a test. So we have this nice little option called No SSL, which tells the system you don't need to use SSL on the response, meaning this URL right here doesn't need to be a SSL URL. But there's certain consequences for doing that, because obviously this is not terribly secure. So we really want to make sure that people only use it for testing. And assuming I didn't mistype anything. This is good. Now, how's that? If you thought that previous screen was bad, how about this one? I mean, come on. Any user who comes to this thing is going to hit that big deny request and run away screaming. And that's going to always be the goal, even when we do go to beta. Because the purpose here is that we should never have a user using no SSL, because it means that the information we're going to send back, which includes authentication data that I'm going to show you in a second, is being sent in an insecure way. But we're testers. We read the dev documentation. And we know that in that sort of gray, light gray text at the bottom of this page, there's a link. And if you should happen to hit that link, you get back to the normal permission page, which also has the ugly warning, and that will disappear when we go to beta. And voila, we have another permission page. Oops. Wanted to hit the button, not scroll. And we will go right back. Now, I've told you before I'd explain this page, and now I'm going to do it. What happens is we made an HTTP request with a URL encoding asking for a permission. The user granted it. The site user was then redirected back to that return location. So if you look up in the address bar, you should recognize that value. And what was sent back was a form post. And that standard, boring form post, no magic. And that form post has 3 values in it. The first value is a response code saying, yes, your request was approved, so you've been granted the permission. The second value is the domain authentication token. This is a very long string, and essentially what it says is the possessor of this string will be believed to be the specified domain, in this case www.mix.com, and the rest is a digital signature, so changing that value won't help you, for this specific user. So if you steal the string, meaning you as a user steal your own string and give it out to someone, all you've just done is hurt yourself, because this string doesn't work for anyone but you. And this is why we require SSL on the return trip, because we want to make sure the string is never sent in the clear. Then what we did is we used that to make a request to the Windows Live Data Server. And that's this URL right here. And what you're seeing here is an HTTPS request to this server. But we have what we call the unified namespace. The idea is that we have here an owner handle. Currently, that's just their email address. But in the future, it could be aliases, IDs, links, lots of other good stuff. And then off of that, we hang their specific services. So in this case, you're seeing live contacts. In 60 days, depending on naming, it may be spaces, photos, and so on. And eventually, we hope you'll be able to make a request just at this level and get back a list of which services you're allowed to know about, to start to make queries across multiple services, et cetera. We've got dreams. Then, so I made a GET request. I made it for this user, for this service. I had to authenticate myself. My server is now sending a request to the Windows Live Data Server, and the Windows Live Data Server is saying, well, who the heck are you? And so that's where that domain authentication token came in. What we did is we actually used a standard HTTP authorization header, but we added a new auth scheme called domain auth token, and we added as a value the actual domain authentication token and submitted that. And what you're seeing here is the response, which is that nice address book. Now, what you're actually seeing here is a piece of XML representing the address book, but for scalability and other reasons, we actually had to introduce a fairly fun little protocol to deal with this, and I'll give you a quick example. So if I click on that link, what you're going to see happen is it actually creates a path to any element anywhere in the XML. And what that means is that you can now interact with this data structure at whatever scope makes the most sense for your app's logic. So in this case, just to show you how this works, what you see here is live contacts. Well, there's a live contacts element. Then you see a contacts plural. Well, gosh, there's a contacts element. Then you see contact with this nasty value inside of it. What that is that the address book contains multiple contact elements. We need a way to distinguish them. So there's an ID element underneath that lets us uniquely identify the element. And so that is the value you see here. And then the rest of the path is just navigating its way down, in this case to first name. And you can see here is our domain authentication token that's been preloaded. And so we have a GET request. So let's go do a GET on that. And we can retrieve that value directly. The point is, every single element has a URL, which means you can get, put, post, and delete at that element. In this case, I got a name. And if I wanted to change that name, let's go do a put. And since I'm sure no one believes I actually just did the update, we'll do a GET. And you can see the name has been changed. But much more important, in my opinion, is the following piece of observation about our put semantics. One of the big challenges we have with a system like Live Contacts is that we are constantly changing the fields we make available. We're always adding new information. Well, we can't go out and tell every client in the world, hey, we've just added some new information. Can you please rev yourself? That's not going to work. So instead, what we've done is our put actually uses merge semantics, not replacement semantics. Let me show you what I mean. So we don't need the ID because that's in the URL. And that's actually a read-only field. And I'll just get rid of the emails and stuff. So you can see emails, locations, lots and lots of information inside this contact element. And in this case, you know what? I'll just change the first name back. Let's make that as a put. And notice what happens. The only change that was actually made, and here I'll reload the whole contact so you can see that I'm not fibbing. The only change that was made was to the first name. I did a put, I did it to the contact, I specified one field, and only that field was updated. Everything else was left alone. That's what we mean by merge semantics, because for those of you who've been doing HTTP for a while, you might have expected the entire contact to be blown away, because typically put will often have replace semantics. But now that I've shown you get and I've shown you put, we do have two more methods to go. So let's show you next post. And if you remember, those of you who are sad enough to be in the business I am of reading standards, you'll remember that post was initially intended to be a way to append new data that didn't necessarily have an address yet. So that's exactly how we use it in our system. So I'm going to use a post to the parent element for contacts, in this case the contacts element, and I'm going to use it to create a new contact. So let's do that right now. We don't specify an ID because the server comes up with the ID. This is a read-only field, so no point in specifying that. And I'll just keep it simple by just putting up a name. We could have put emails, locations, whatever we want. The schema is quite flexible, actually. So let's do a submit on that. And now let's go and actually retrieve all the contacts so that you can see the new contact is there. And as you can see, we now have a brand new contact that says hello mix. So you can again use standard get, put, post, and wait, there was one more. What about delete? And as you can see, this is just the path to the contact I just created. And now we'll do a get. Well, just for fun, we'll do the get at the direct contact. That should just give me a 400. And in fact, it's telling me 404, no value. Sorry, that contact no longer exists. So the point is that what you can see is with this system, you're able to address the address book at whatever level makes sense or whatever scope makes the most sense, and be able to directly interact with that scope using get, put, post, and delete. So a few more details. I told you about domain authentication tokens and how you're going to use those to prove to the system who you are. What happens if your domain authentication tokens are stolen? The answer for today is, in our developer documentation, we actually have a telephone number you can call, and we can revoke those tokens instantaneously. And no, you don't need to know what tokens they are. You just need your site name and the date, and we'll do some authentication steps to make sure you are who you claim to be, and your tokens will no longer be good. I showed you how to authenticate using domain authentication tokens because those are the easiest things for most people to get started with, but we do also support mutual SSL auth. So if you can configure a mutual SSL connection, which essentially means using your server cert for a client call, you can authenticate that way, in which case you don't need a domain authentication token at all. We know who you are. The protocol I showed you is for live contacts, but when we come out with Spaces photo support in 60 days or so, that's actually going to be by WebDAV. And that's RC2518. And the thing to understand there is actually a little saying we have, which is, there cannot be only one. What we mean by that is, there is not some homogeneous community of undifferentiated developers on the internet who are just waiting for some unified protocol to solve all of their problems. There are different communities, they have different interests, they have different focuses, they have different trade-offs. We need to be sensitive to that, and it means when we come up with a service that we're making available, it needs to be made available using the protocol or protocols that that particular community is going to be most interested in and most comfortable with. So in this case of, say, Spaces Photos, the protocol that has the most traction in sort of blob handling, which is what photos are, is actually WebDAV, and I don't just say that because I was the lead editor on the spec. So as we're evaluating the different services to bring out, we're looking for feedback from all of you to say, hey, how do you want to interact with these services? Because we actually expect not just, well, we have different protocols for different services, we actually expect to make the same service available over different protocols. Now, I've talked about server-to-server communication. What about AJAX? What about browsers? I mean, I thought that whole server thing was, you know, sort of out of style. And the answer is that yes, we will be supporting the ability to grant and use permissions strictly within the browser. And the way we're going to do that is a few things. First of all, we're going to put in JSON support. No, we don't have to. XML does work in the browser, but let's face it, JSON's a lot easier. And then we're also going to put in place the ability to make cross-domain calls. Now, you actually saw one of those mechanisms earlier in this presentation. When I showed you the contact control, I said at that time that we were able to move the data from the frame from Microsoft to the host frame without a server round trip. Well, that's a channel mechanism we have, and if you want to learn more, there's some good articles, and I can give you some directions there. But the bottom line is that we can use that mechanism to actually allow your Ajax application or your browser application to talk directly to the Windows Live data server. So you will be able to build Ajax and browser-based applications without having to go and have necessarily a server component. Currently, we're scheduling that for the beta, kind of hoping we'll get it out a little sooner. We'll see. So I've talked about server to server. I've talked about browser to server. There's still another audience that I haven't addressed. What about smart clients, or Windows terminology for stuff you download? How are they able to get into the system? Especially because they don't care about permissions. If you're downloading code to your machine, it's running in an uncontrolled environment, you might as well give it your name and password because it can do anything it wants anyway. So it's perfectly reasonable for a smart client to actually ask for your name and password. And the great news is that we actually do support the Windows Live ID infrastructure and the ability to get what's called a compact ticket that you can submit to us, and we'll validate and we'll let you in. But how do you get the ticket? We saw the permission system to get you the domain authentication token. How are you going to get that ticket? Well, the really good news for all of you who are developing on Windows is that Windows Live ID has released a brand new system called IDCRL that you can put directly into your application and will handle all of the gunk around how you make the request, how you get the ticket, and we'll give you that information so you can submit the ticket to us, and I'll show you how to submit that ticket in a second. But what if you're not developing on Windows? What do you do then? That's what this demo is about. So what I'm going to show you, whoops, sorry. This is a page I put together. It's running on my local machine because I don't like putting up web pages on the internet that ask people for their name and password. But what you're seeing here is a body of a request, a post in fact, to some magical URL with some content type, something about soap, cleanliness or something, I don't know. And it contains a bunch of angle brackets and stuff. In my code, this is actually a string. I didn't even bother with a DOM. But the key part you care about is that there's this thing that asks for a username. So let's give it a username. And it asks for a password. So let's give it a password. And if we then submit that, what we get back is more angle brackets, lots and lots of angle brackets. Actually, the newer format's much cleaner than this. But the key thing you care about is what we've kindly put in bold. This is a compact ticket. This is the value that you're going to use to authenticate yourself to our system. So all you do is you literally just copy this value straight out. It's already encoded and nice and ready to go. And let's do this. And we go to the passport access link. And this should look familiar by now, right? It's saying, well, you know, I want a username. So there's a username. Except in this case, notice, yes, we have an authorization header. We saw that before. But the protocol is different. It's not domain authentication token. It's WLID 1.0. So let's submit our little compact ticket. And if the demo gods are happy, and they are, we got full access to the address book, just like we did with the domain authentication token, but with no permission step. The key thing to keep in mind here, by the way, yes, this works on anyone who can make a post request and who can parse some XML, so it works on any platform you care about. But generally speaking, compact tickets are good for a couple of hours at most. So you're eventually going to get back a 401 unauthorized, and when you do, you need to go back, resubmit the name and password, get a new compact ticket, and bring that back. In the case of domain authentication tokens, on the other hand, because they're not used in the same way as compact tickets, they're actually good for between 1 to 2 years. So you won't generally be renewing those terribly often. Oh, it's right next demo. I did promise you that I would show revocation, so let's do that. So you're the user, and you decide, hey, I want to know who I've given permissions to. And oh, that's from an earlier demo. See, it's what happens when you don't clean up your permissions. And you can see here that we have some other demo sites we did, and we can see here's MIX that we just invented on this machine right here, because if the user trusts it, we trust it. And so you can go in here, see who you've given permissions to, and also decide that, you know what, I don't want anyone to have permission. And you can clean up permissions as you want, so let's revoke that. And all the permissions are deleted. So a user at any time can decide to remove a permission, and that's it. Your site will no longer have access. I don't care that you have a domain authentication token. It authenticates you. It does not authorize you. So as soon as those permissions are gone, so is your access to the system, as it should be. Now, for the end part of our presentation today, what I wanted to talk to you about is the most important thing I can talk about. Because let's face it, what people remember is the last thing you say, so I want this to be the last thing I say. The current system that we've put together does not meet Microsoft's bar for privacy for users. Yes, it meets the industry bar, and it should look kind of familiar in terms of its usability and security features. And from a security perspective, we are in very good shape. But from a privacy perspective, we simply have not done enough to make this a system that we're comfortable opening up to the general public, which is why we put that ugly, horrible red warning thingy at the top to make sure that the only people who are using it while it's in alpha are people who are there for testing purposes. So the issues that we feel we have to address before we're going to be ready to go out and move into beta, where all those warnings come off and the system's available and you can go into deployment, are the following things. First of all, we've got to help users make good trust decisions. Right now, we show them a domain name, say, good luck, God bless. It's not enough. First of all, we're going to hook into our phishing database. So if you're about to give permission to a site that we know is a bad site, gosh, we're going to let you know that. And right now, I mean, this is subject to change, but we're still going to let you give trust if you want to. It's the user's data. We can advise, but we're not in the business of giving commands. But just as we want to identify who the bad people are, we also want to help users easily identify who are the good people. So the things we're looking at there are working with organizations like Trustee, whether them in particular we'll find out. What these folks do is they provide auditing for websites to look at things like their data retention behaviors, privacy policies, etc. What we want to do is see if we can come up with a new higher tier certification that if a site goes through all the hoops and gets that certification and goes through the auditing, we'll let the user know. So not only will we tell you who the bad guys are, we want to hopefully help you figure out who the good guys are. Another problem we have that's really causing us a ton of headaches is around user identity and managing that identity. In the current system, we identify the user with their Windows Live member name, their email address. But do you really want to have to give out your email address if you're publishing your top 10 favorite restaurants? In some cases, the answer is yes. Because you're part of a community, you may be publishing that information on multiple websites, and you want people to know it was you. But in other cases, the answer may be no. From a technology perspective, this is actually not a particularly difficult problem. There's lots of technical solutions available for this. One-time IDs, pairwise unique IDs, aliases, the list goes on. The thing we're struggling with is not the technology. We're struggling with how do we give users an experience that's actually going to make them successful in managing their data. For example, one of the things a lot of people, including myself, kind of like are aliases, this idea that I can create alternate names for my account that hopefully may not even have email attached to them, so if you spam me it doesn't work, but it allows me to build up a reputation. But the problem is that now as a user I suddenly have to remember, okay, so I want to share this blog entry and I want to share it under this alias. Did I mention my name anywhere in that blog entry? When I share my top 10 restaurant list thinking I'm doing it privately, did I remember not to mention my email address or my location or any other identifying information in any of that data? Because if I screw up, then I've blown my identity, right? I've blown my anonymity. And we don't know that users really can handle things at that final level. In fact, my personal feeling is that the way we see users actually deal with this in real life is they have multiple accounts. So they'll have a home account, which they use with friends and family. They'll have a work account. And then they'll have an account that they do things they don't want associated with those other two accounts. And so the question is, can we do a better job of working with that kind of paradigm and saying to the user, look, if you want to share things that aren't going to be associated with your identity, create an account for it, and know that anything that goes into that account is specifically things you don't want associated with your identity. Since users do that now, we think they'll get it. And then the challenge becomes, can we make it easier for the user to manage those multiple identities? This is still an open area. This is an area we're going to have to do usability testing in. We're still trying to figure it out. It's really hard. As I said, it's not about technology. It's about psychology. Next up, our permissions are good until revoked, which in many cases is great. If I have a successful relationship with a website, I don't want that relationship to suddenly disappear because some timer ran out. On the other hand, if I had an interaction with a website 5 years ago that I haven't used since, I maybe would prefer they didn't have that permission anymore. But did I even remember? So what we're looking at, first of all, is sending users reminders that, hey, you've given these permissions. You still want them out there? But I suspect we'll also need to provide time limits and say to a user, look, if you want to put a time limit on a permission, great, we'll give you the way to do that. Last but not least, sharing is not granular enough. What I mean by that is right now when you share your address book, it's the whole thing. It's every field, it's every value, it's every contact. That's a lot of data to have to be handing out. We have to do better than that. One of the first things we're looking at is tagging. Our address book system has a tagging infrastructure. It's how you do folders and other things in Messenger that you can use to identify a contact. Say, is this a friend? Is it family? Is it business? What is it? Well, what we're looking at doing is allowing you, when you give a permission to a particular site, to specify what tags you want to share with that site. So it's not your whole address book. It's just a subset of it. In addition, we're also looking at field filtering. The idea is that if I'm sharing my address book with some site to do like social networking, you know what? They don't need my friends' shipping addresses. They don't need my friends' phone numbers. What they need are my friends' email addresses. So what I would like to be able to do is when that site comes in and asks for permission to read my address book, I want to be told, by the way, this site is only going to get access to your email addresses. And if I see that they're asking for access to my email addresses, my shipping locations, my phone numbers, and everything else, I'm probably going to tell them to go away. So we want to also give that level of granularity. This is just a sampling of some of the issues that we're grappling with in order to allow us to go to beta. But until we have good, solid solutions to these problems, we're not going to be releasing a beta. And so we're definitely very interested in talking to the community and getting feedback as to what you think makes sense. So before we get to any questions, a quick note. Rather than inundate you with a bunch of links, we have a wonderful website, dev.live.com. And I don't just say that because all the guys who build it are in my group. That has all of the information about everything I talked about here. It has all the data on IDCRL for those of you building smart clients. It has all the data on Windows Live Data. It has all the data on the contact controls. So everything that you could possibly want to know about interacting with the system is available up there. So with that, any questions?
Have you considered XPath support for when you were working through the GET API? Yeah. It's close, not quite there?
Absolutely. And in fact, what we've been looking at is we believe that in the path segment, that needs to be deterministic. So it's always going to return a single element. So that's why it's this very limited path-like language. But what we want to do, and we're experimenting with now, and there's some really, really interesting security issues with, is allowing you to put a question mark at the end of that URL and slapping on an XPath. And then you could do a generic query. We're also, by the way, looking at eventually having support for something like the search method that you may have saw in Dazzle, because what that would allow us to do is with XPath, you can specify what information you're looking for, but you can't say how you want it returned to you. What format do you want it put in? So if you look at something like an X query, it not being built on XPath, not only does it allow you to say, here's what I want, it also allows you to say, and here's how I want to get it back. And that's why we think a search method might also be very, very interesting. So yes.
Cool. Question how this relates to the card space, and if it's going to be integrated longer term?
Well, in fact, the people who can answer that question are sitting right there. So I'll let Lynn, why don't you go up and explain our plans around card space. So you ask a question and we get you the experts.
So Windows Live ID is going to be supporting a beta for card space integration this summer. And what that means is that we will be accepting card space as a credential type that the user can provide the same way that we accept password today. So a user can come to any supported sign-in interface and they can say, no, I don't want to use an old-fashioned password. I want to use an information card. And then they can submit a self-issued information card and we will validate that their credential is correct the same way that we validate the password is correct. After that validation, we issue an authentication token, which Yaron showed you when he was showing the client integration, where based on the username and password, we return an authentication token. You can imagine that instead of inputting username and password there, you input an information card there, and then you would get back the same type of authentication token. So we abstract that away from any relying services.
And what's great about that for us, actually it'll be easier if you can go to a microphone because I won't be able to hear you this far out. But what's great about that for us is, as a product group, is we just use Windows Live ID, aka Passport, for all of our auths. So when they've got it, we get it.
Okay, it's a quite relevant question. What about OpenID? CardSpace says we will support it. So the Live ID will support OpenID via the CardSpace or directly?
Right. So my understanding, Lynn, is that as part of CardSpace, CardSpace has support for OpenID. So when you support CardSpace, you therefore have support, I believe, for OpenID. Did I get the connections right, or did I screw up? Ah, see, now we go up the management chain. This is Nilma, the boss's boss, I think.
Actually, OpenID is supporting CardSpace, and OpenID is both in terms of it is a protocol, it is a network. Windows Live ID is a network because you have relying party sites. Over time, we will be supporting, we are kind of looking at OpenID whether we want to be a provider or a relying party site to the OpenID. But we are just evaluating now. We don't have any.
Cool.
So a lot of the protocol, the gets and posts and stuff like that, why not just use web services instead of a little protocol where you go into the different pieces of the XML and pass the GUIDs around and stuff?
So really, that was based on a lot of the feedback that we got from the developer community on the internet, which is that, yeah, for people who are very familiar with Windows software, a web services interface would be a lot easier and faster, and with our tools, you'd be up and running very quickly. And in fact, I would expect that at some point we'll provide it just so that community can get up and running quickly. But a large percentage of the target audience we're going after, remember, this is a breath play, aren't using Windows software up on their servers. And so we needed a solution that they're going to be able to very quickly get up and running on. And more than that, because of the just mind-boggling combination of operating systems, applications, servers, productivity frameworks, programming languages, et cetera, we could never produce enough libraries and enough combinations to make everyone happy. So our sort of entry-level thought is we need a protocol that's so trivially simple that people can just write it themselves directly without needing a lot of that tooling. And it was a trade-off, but we think for the community it was the right one. But that in no way means we don't come out later with a web services-based solution. Sam.
Have you looked into support for Eclipse's Project Higgins identity system? It's similar to CardSpace.
I believe CardSpace is our anointed solution. Any other questions? Okay, great. Last few comments. We do have some fantastic events coming out here. So we're going to have open mic around getting users and money on Windows Live Gallery. And what that's going to be about is really focusing on having the people from us there so you can just go and talk to them and get information from them. At 2:15, we have a presentation by John, who I think is sitting back there. There he is. And that's going to be on how you can develop with a lot of the cool new stuff that Windows Live Spaces has made available so that you, as a Spaces user, you can add lots of new functionality. And do not forget the deep dive on Windows Live ID, the open mic for that. That's when Lynn and I suspect Nilma will be there so that you can ask them many more detailed Windows Live ID questions around card space and OpenID and the rest of it. And then, of course, tonight we have the party at Pure. Don't forget Windows Live Gallery. We have it. It has lots of cool stuff that you can go see what people are using our stuff for. And thank you. Have a great day.